Welcome back to the show. You can join us on social media, on our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, which will be streaming on your screen right now. And then you can also join us by WhatsApp on the number that is streaming on your screen. But I'll begin the conversation. Nana, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
From your perspective as the Chief Executive of the Private Enterprise Federation, outside the constraints that a business might find itself operating under, what are the factors that affect the competitiveness of private sector enterprises in Ghana, the external factors?
Policies. Government policies that usually create encumbrance and constraints on how to do business. Let me give an example of the policy. The bread and butter of private sector is money. Mm-hmm. That is the item that allows private sector to use to create the opportunities and do business. But in our environment, we don't have long-term funding. So the policy to create long-term funding is way too long that had not happened. We had something called the EDIF, which was supposed to be the source of funding for long-term, up to 5-7 years for private sector to take and then do business. EDIF was merged into Exim. Now we have an Exim Bank. The Exim Bank area of operations, normally the way it is structured, it's not allowing private sector to go and tap into that resource and then be able to use that. And the volume of resource that will be available is not even, it's minuscule compared to what our competitors from the different locations are doing. The scenario is a Ghanaian private sector is borrowing at a long term, is borrowing at high cost, 30% rate of return. The counterpart coming from Europe is borrowing at 3%. Look at the disparity, 27% margin. That's disadvantage to the Ghanaian. Then they come in, the local Ghanaian businesses do not qualify for tax exemptions because the strategic level of investment that allows for tax exemption is in excess of 50 million. Most of our companies are not worth 50 million, so they don't qualify for the tax exemption. The diaspora private sector gets the tax exemption of 25%. So if you add a 25% advantage, add a disadvantage of 27%, you have a 52% disadvantage to the local. So those are some of the things that we think policies should be structured in a way to create the support for the local indigenous private sector. If you look at also the ways of getting licensing, regulations that allow private sector to tap into EPA license, zoning licensing, the business permit, they're so cumbersome. Even if the private sector wants to be in compliance, they don't even know where to start and what to do. So they have to rely on consultants who are part of the old regime of retired officers of these administrative agencies to deliver the kind of requirements to meet the details of what they need to be done. So unless we streamline these administrative agencies to the point that they become efficient, they're becoming constraining factors on private sector. If I'm going to start a business and I have aggregated my staff, my technical people, only to find out that I need a fire inspected certificate. The fire people are supposed to come immediately or within a certain time. They're delaying months, sometimes even into a year. If they're delaying, my people are not going to wait, because if they wait, I have to pay them. That's extra cost. If I don't pay them, they're going to leave. When they leave, I have to start all over again. So these are some of the things that are constraining factors to private sector outside of our own difficulties within internal organizations.
So in other words, you think we are overregulated?
We're not overregulated. I think that we are regulated adequately, but in inefficient ways. That if we have efficiency in the administrative agencies, give example, the fire inspectorate are supposed to be 2 per district. We have how many districts? 216. The entire fire department has 50. So obviously there's a deficiency. The office inspectorate is supposed to operate with 6 within a district. within a region. They operate in only 6 regions and they have only 27 inspectors. So those deficiencies that are occurring because of government's maybe lack of resources to pay or to train and get these officers in place is something that need to be done. Much more, there's no formal training for fire people to train an inspector. They tap in the fire warden, you become a fire inspector tomorrow. They tap into office inspectors. Some of them have educational standards, like go through University of Science and Technology in Kumasi to become a zoning and a planning officer. But some of them, they don't. So the standards are just not adequate to meet the international standards. So the private sector businessman who doesn't know woman, who doesn't have the technical skills, also going to do business whichever way and creates the problem that we don't meet the international standards. And then it comes back to hunters. So our competitiveness are skewed basically because of the policies that are not streamlined in a way that allows the private sector to adequately understand what are my requirements, what are the things that I got to do, what are the especially taxes. In our tax system, we have the tax commissioner can come to a business and say, we haven't declared dividend in the past 5 years. So looking at your returns on the annual income, we are going to ask you to declare dividend and tax you. The commissioner invading the boardroom decision of a company for them to declare dividends to enable the commissioner to tax. This is not unheard of. These are some of the constraints that we think once we sit together, we can identify them for policymakers to understand that that's why the Ghanaian businesses are not being competitive.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Van Staldening. From the perspective of the investor community that have also invested in Ghana, would you agree with the points that Nana Osei-Bonsu has made? And do you think that perhaps it also has to do with the lack of capacity within the small and medium enterprise sector that also needs to be addressed, in addition to the government's own challenges of not having enough people to do the jobs that have been regulated and that need to be done?
To the first side of Nana's answer, I think if foreign investors are having advantages compared to Ghanaian entrepreneurs, the facilities to attract foreign direct investment should be concentrating on sectors where there's a lack in the economy of Ghana, should be concentrated on a lack of knowledge in Ghana, and all other sectors shouldn't even be on the list of having tax exemptions. That's normal competition. On interest, there is a big gap in interest rates, but there's also something that Nana forgot to tell. If you take a loan for 2 years at 27% with an inflation of 15, by all means after 2 years you pay 30% less than your 27%. So the gap becomes a little bit smaller than Nana is suggesting at the moment. On the other hand, I agree 100% with bureaucracy. Ghana is very conservative and is not really adaptive to new law and simplifications of all kinds of rules and regulations. Let me give you an example. Although I'm a Ghanaian, my wife is a born and bred Ghanaian. Our daughter is by birth Dutch, but also by birth Ghanaian because she has Ghanaian parents. The Dutch law doesn't accept it and wants her to make a choice to become either a Ghanaian or a Dutch. So we have applied for a right of abode for my daughter to waive that because according to Ghanaian law she is already a Ghanaian. We filled the whole form and we were sent back home with the form because there was no cover letter. The form is designed just for that application. The name is there, everybody knows where that form is coming in for, but there has to be a letter. With this letter I apply for the right of abode. Even this one sentence is enough with your signature and you are sent home. And that is needless bureaucracy, and it's not only in this, it's in a lot of things. A few months ago I visited the company, I was invited by the director, and there were 7 certificates of what he complied to and where he was registered. And it was an official company just selling tiles. So we should do much more than we're doing at the moment to make things much simpler. And the more difficult things are, the more help you need and information you need from public servants, And I don't want to call the word too much, but everybody knows there's a price for that help. And we are being delayed more and more to make sure that they will get that help. And in their case, it's financial help, and you get some information help. So bureaucracy is for me a very, very big thing.
Well, that's a very interesting way of couching it. Nana, from your perspective, following on from the point that Nico has made, if there were three things that you could change, the three most important things in terms of the way in which government interacts with the private sector, what would be those top three things?
First one, consistency in dialogue. Because if the policymakers don't understand, don't know, then they're not going to be informed to make the right policies. So a continuous dialogue between private sector and the highest levels of government is critical to alert everybody as to, or to understand each other. PEF and GIMPA are putting together what we call Institute of Public Sector and Private Sector Development. The announcement should be coming soon. That will allow public sector, senior public sector officials to be able to go to private sector institutions, learn about the impact of policies they were part of creating, and then allow private sector to also sit in the ministries or the chief directors and the other agencies to also determine how policies are made. Because we have to understand each other. We are in this together. The survival and success of a government is predicated on the success of private sector. Because private sector is the engine that provides the revenue stream to government. Unless we do that, then government will be found to be borrowing consistently. In our environment, because private sector is not making enough profit and they're not paying enough taxes, government is forced or possibly had no option but to go out and borrow to create the resources to execute its agenda. So we have to look at private sector as the beacon that comes to the table for everybody to be happy. And that is the first one as to how the understanding of policy, creating the dialogue. The second is capital mobilization. We can't say enough about availability of long-term capital because we rely on short-term capital in our environment to do long-term business, and it doesn't work. If you borrow before you can say, Jack, within the 2 months, you started to make the interest payment or the P&I going forward. That is the same money you borrow using to retire the debt. So we need long-term capital. In Ghana, we have pension scheme, 3-tier pension scheme. If government were to encourage people to participate by giving baits as to if you do ABC, you get this in return. We have 12 million people estimated workforce. Only 1 million are covered under any pension. If we take the 11 that are not covered, 4 million out of that, 25 cedis per person of the 4 million, 25 cedis a month per person, we aggregate 1.2 billion a year. This is long-term funding. In 6 years, look at the quantum where we'll be. And this is captive funding that will be looking for destination for investment that will allow private sector to tap into. When we did the pension funds, only 40% were to be invested in government treasuries. Now, 90% or 70% are going in treasuries. So the private sector is now lacking the opportunity to tap into the fund. So the second is capital mobilization. From within, there's resources in the country. If an investor is applying for a banking license, they require capitalization of 60 million. They bring the 60 million in kind plus capital, liquidity and all. But within 6 months, they've acquired assets of 2 billion. They were able to mobilize from within. So it's on the back of government to look at opportunities to create this kind of resource, long-term pool of funding that the private sector. The third one, and one of the most important, competencies and skills development. If we look at our educational system, we have everybody going from grade school through to university PhDs. But there was a statistics recently from Israel. 700,000 people start the first year. When they get to BCC, 350,000 drop off before high school. From the high school, 350 remaining, that's 50%. By the time they get to tertiary universities, only 6,000 left. What happened to those quantum that dropped off. There are no training programs. That's when we had the vocational training. Were they working? No. So in Ghana, we don't have the artisan capacities that will support businesses. So when businesses are talking about there's a misalignment of the training versus the requirement, the skills that are required in business, that is the point that we're making. The missing middle, the competency of the artisan level to support private sector, businesses. So the three things is capital, resource, human resource, financial resource, and then the administrative things that we are talking about.
I'll come back to you on that because there have been a number of interventions to try to address this gap with vocational and technical skills. But Nico, from your perspective, if you had the opportunity to change three things, what would they be?
Complete overhaul of the educational system. Bureaucracy, cutting a lot of the rules and regulations. And let me give you one example. When I was 21 years old, I was a member of a city council. And the city was collecting a dog tax, which is normal in Europe because they dirty the streets and everything.
Dog tax?
Dog tax. So if you own a dog, you pay 50 guilders at that time, tax. And I saw the budget of the people collecting the dog tax. And the dog tax was actually too short to pay the whole budget of the department. So I said, either you start checking more, so then you have to raise your dog tax, or you cancel it and cancel the whole department. And there were long discussions of people who were very conservative because it was existing already for over 50 years. But at the end of the day, they concluded that nobody is going to be to restrain having a dog just because of 50 guilders. So in the end, the discussion was, are we going to raise it or cancel it? And they decided to cancel it. Have you ever heard of any law being cancelled in Ghana? That hardly happens. They also cancelled, for example, if you had a normal roof and you wanted a window in your roof, you required a building license. What they have at the moment is you send a request to the town hall, and if you don't get an answer within 21 days, you can do it without any license. I mean, we can do that kind of things in Ghana as well. Simplify things, make it easier, especially for entrepreneurs, but also there will be a gratitude from all the people of Ghana if they're not disturbed by these kind of things. The other thing is being consistent. I'm running a small guest house in Jorulu, and there are certain taxes I have to pay to the district municipality over there. This year they're coming in February for the taxes, the next year in September, and then they come a few days before Christmas threatening to close my guest house down. So that kind of things are really disturbing business. Be consequent. If people need to pay, make sure you are there every time they are supposed to pay. And don't use it as a threat to close something. Just cash your money the way you are supposed to cash it. I'm more than willing to pay because I don't want to set an example for others not to pay. But be consistent, and that is very important in business. And with the education system, to me, in general, I didn't know. I was complaining about a lot of things in Ghana, in the bureaucratic system and in all kinds of rules and regulations. Actually blaming Ghana until 7 years ago my son moved to study in the UK, and I found out that these rules and regulations are not from Ghana. They are what the UK left for us, and they were just changed a little bit in the margins. And I don't want to blame the UK, but let's be fair, it's not the most modern country in Europe. They have parts who are on world level, but on the other hand, I mean, they have phone booths and taxis which belong in a museum in the rest of the world. And it gives some, for tourists, nice attractions, but it shows a little bit how the country is. And a lot of big countries are like that. But we in Ghana, we're a young republic. When Ghana became independent, we barely had more than 5 million people. We are developing quick. We have a young population. I think Ghana should modernize a lot of laws and rules and regulations, and that would help business.
So there's room for a regulatory legislative overhaul.
Yes.
On that note, we'll take a commercial break and then we'll come back and continue the conversation.